unthinkable and shocking and appalling. The murder of men, women and children in cold blood. It's terrorism by Hamas. It needs to be called out as such, and Israel obviously has a right to defend herself. But I think it's important now that all responsible Middle East states call this out for what it is, call out terrorism, and make it clear that we stand with Israel in what is a very, very dark time.
Starmer is alongside me now. Morning to you.
Good morning.
Everyone's sick of you talking about Arsenal, is that true?
Well, there are many different teams supported within the Labour family. But
come on, Keir Starmer, don't give us a politician's answer.
I could have done 10 minutes on Arsenal any day of the week, but I'm not sure that's what everybody else wanted. But we are playing very well, and of course we did beat City on Sunday, which was a big victory.
It was a big victory. Now listen, I'm just looking at you now to see if there's any glitter in your hair. I've been told by people who know these things that glitter is a nightmare to shift. Is it off your suit? Is it out your hair?
It is a nightmare to shift, but I was absolutely determined that this wasn't going to disrupt what has been 4 years of really hard work, getting the Labour Party from where we landed in 2019, which was a very bad place, to this, our last conference before the general election, where we had to set out, and did set out, our positive case. So
was this a culminating moment? Did you see it as a culminating moment to an extent?
Oh, very much, yes. I mean, I've always seen this as 3 stages. I took over 3.5 years ago. Labour Party picked it up off the floor. We had to change the Labour Party at pace and ruthlessly, expose the Tories and the SNP as not fit to govern. But then this stage, which was always the third stage, but very important, which is setting out the positive case, and making the case that it doesn't have to be another decade of decline, which is what we've seen over the last 10, 13 years. We can, as a country, go forward to a decade of national renewal. And it was very important to me and to the party to be able to set out that case and weld together, I suppose, if you like, the reassurance that people desperately need in difficult times with the hope and aspiration of a better future.
I want to get to the policy in a minute, but just 'cause I know people will want to hear what you've thought of it. It is frightening when people leap out from nowhere. You wouldn't know what he was doing. You wouldn't know it was glitter. You don't know what he's complaining about. How did you feel? How did you feel inside when that man leapt on the stage?
My overwhelming feeling was, I am not going to let you ruin 4 years of hard work in this party. And that's why I was determined that we would get on with it.
Were you worried? Were you worried for your safety? Did that even cross your mind?
I just wanted to get on with the speech, and that's why I rolled up my sleeves and got on with it. And that, I didn't want that idiot to interrupt that, and I don't want that idiot to dominate what I've got to say today.
Fine, well, let's move on to the things that you have to say. Your big idea, I think, was building 1.5 million houses in 5 years. Now, Keir Starmer, for the entirety of my adult life, I've heard politicians standing up on stages and say, we're going to build hundreds of thousands of houses this year. They never, ever, ever hit the target they say. Why should you be different? Because
we have set out the target and alongside it set out the plan and the way in which we're going to achieve it. What you've had in the past is politicians plucking a number, but that's wishful thinking. What we've said is we'll put the targets back up, we will tackle the planning restrictions which stand in the way of housing, and we will partner with those that will do the building for us. But the planning bit is absolutely crucial. Almost always in recent years, this government in particular, has pulled back when it's got to any kind of protest about where they want to build. They've pulled back in the face of restrictive planning regulations. We will not do that. So the reason this is different is not the number, which is an ambitious number, the right number, but it's the fact that we have set out the plan, the strategy, and a real determination to take the difficult decisions to make sure that this happens.
People don't trust targets from politicians. So could you say to us this morning, if you don't hit this one in 5 years, you've set 5 years, 1.5 million houses. If you don't hit it, Keir Starmer, you could say, I won't stand again to be Prime Minister. This is how determined I am to hit this target. I've said I'll do it. If I don't do it, I will not stand again for a second term.
I'm confident that we can hit this target. I wouldn't have put it out there if I wasn't confident. One of the things I've been doing in the last 6 to 12 months is bomb-proofing everything we put out as a party, and some people have interpreted those shifts of position as somehow a weakness. Actually, it's a strength to say, I will not put anything before the electorate after what they've been through, which I do not think is credible, that can't be delivered.
So back that up and say that then. I will not stand as Prime Minister for a second term if I don't deliver the thing that I'm promising to deliver.
I'm confident. I wouldn't put it forward if I didn't think that we could do it.
But you can't make that promise.
It's not just a number. It is about aspiration and opportunity.
I understand that, but all I'm saying is, you're talking about, you made this very clear in your speech, people are sick of being lied to by politicians. Politicians stand up, they live behind the Westminster Wall, and they say things, and they're not held to account. You've made a plan for 5 years. 5 years is an electoral term.
Yeah.
I'm just interested in saying whether you can say to us, if I don't do it, I'm not going to stand again. I'm not going to be the person who breaks the trust.
I'm very comfortable putting our proposals before the electorate, fully thought through, credible, and which I have confidence. In 5 years' time, if we're lucky enough to get elected in next time to serve, the electorate will have their chance to judge whether we are delivering on what we've said. I'm confident we will, but of course the electorate will have to judge. What I don't want to do, and didn't want to do yesterday, was to pretend that all of this can be done in one 5-year term. The damage that's been done to our country is huge, and that's why I talked in terms of a 10-year project of national renewal.
And will you tell your MPs to wind their necks in if they go NIMBY on you when you're in power? Because that's one of the problems, isn't it? That the leadership say one thing, and then local MPs who are pressured by who have to get re-elected, they say, "Oh, not in my patch."
Yes, of course we will, and that's always a feature of politics. But we have to rise above that. That has held back housing for the last 13 years. We cannot allow that to go on. Obviously, we want to work with local communities. That's why we've set out that this will be done, bringing local authorities together to ensure that we get the right housing in the right place. The problem we've got at the moment is a bit of a Wild West. Property is hoarded. Developers, in the end, get the final say on where houses are. I want that to be done by local communities, working together strategically, the right housing that they want with the right infrastructure, the schools and the public services to go with it. But we are going to have to get tough with anybody who stands in the way of that, and that will include any Labour MPs who say, well, I'm signed up to the project, but just not here.
Yeah, I think people want to hear that. Now, this week has, of course, been dominated by news from Gaza and Israel. You made reference to that in your speech. You'll have seen the stories this morning. Your reaction to the claims of massacred babies that are emerging out of kibbutzes in Israel?
It's unthinkable and shocking and appalling. The murder of men, women and children in cold blood. It's terrorism by Hamas. It needs to be called out as such, and Israel obviously has a right to defend herself. But I think it's important now that all responsible Middle East states call this out for what it is, call out terrorism, and make it clear that we stand with Israel in what is a very, very dark time.
Will you stand with Israel whatever they do now? Because, will you support any action they take in response to Gaza? Does that include the cutting off of water?
I want to be really clear. Israel has the right to defend herself in response to these awful acts of terrorism, cold-blooded murder, and that is the in-principle position. Obviously, everybody needs to act within international law, but I don't think at this stage we should be saying anything other than Israel has the right to defend herself.
So you're willing to write them effectively a blank moral check in that sense, to say do what you have to do?
I'm willing to sit here today looking at the terrible attacks we've seen and say Israel has the right to defend herself. And I think every right-minded politician and person and many, many people listening will absolutely agree with that. And I think we all of our thoughts and sadly condolences are with those that have been affected, impacted and sadly died as a result of this.
I know you have to leave. You've got lots to do this morning. But I just want to ask one last question before you go, Keir Starmer, if I may. You made a very personal pitch we don't have a presidential system in this country, but the Prime Minister matters. The personality of the Prime Minister matters. You gave a long speech for people to know who you are. I wonder if you could tell our listeners maybe something about you that they didn't know. Tell us something about your personality they might not have known. Something about your character or you that might be a surprise to them.
Well, I think a lot of me is out there already. I mean, the story I was telling yesterday is the story of a working class boy who had working class aspiration and opportunity and used that as a springboard to go forward, to become a lawyer, to head up a public service, and now to sit here alongside you as leader of the Labour Party. And the point I was trying to make yesterday, and I think probably for the first time this clearly is, that's not just a story about me, it's what I want every person to have, that opportunity, that aspiration, the ordinary hope of working class people.
Well, people will have a chance to judge you on that. We're very grateful for you coming here this morning and talking to us about it.
Thanks for having me.
That's Keir Starmer, the leader of the opposition. Kate McCann is next to me as well. What did you make of that? He came quite early, actually, because he was here. He was due at 7. We were doing the sport, and he sat down. So we had a chance to talk to him. What did you make? What did you make of that?
I think the language that Labour is using is really interesting. I mean, Asma picked up on it there, that the fact that Labour is using turns of phrase like bomb-proofing, they're repeating this idea of ironclad or iron policies, talking about welding. Like, what Sir Keir Starmer wants you to take away is that he is a strong guy, that he is ready, and that he is prepared to lead. And I actually think in some of the answers that you got from him, you could see that he was fairly robust. For example, on the planning system, one of the biggest problems with reforming the planning system is exactly as you say, opposition from local MPs, where they don't want homes built in their area. And, you said, will you hold their feet to the fire? Will you tell them to wind their necks in? And he said, yes, I will. Yeah. Now, that's going to be one of the biggest commitments that he makes, and it will come back on him, because the housing situation at the minute in this country is in real difficulty. And Labour has committed itself to pretty much exactly the same targets the Tories have done. And there are lots of Conservatives out and about today pointing that out and saying that Labour is not ambitious enough. What Labour says is that many of those homes haven't been built. Where they have, they're not in the right places, and that is down to the planning system. And what was announced yesterday is a fairly fundamental reform of how that will work. Redefining Greenbelt, for example, as grey belt, areas which are in the Greenbelt but which are things like old petrol forecourts or old car parks, which the party says it wants every single local council in the country to look at what it's got in terms of Greenbelt, assess it, and decide where housing can be built. At the minute, that doesn't happen. And it doesn't happen for a reason, because councils are hesitant about doing that. They want to look to brownfield sites. Labour says that's not good enough. We need to really get moving on this. And they've set a 5-year target because they recognise they're not going to be able to build 300,000 homes in the first year. They want to ramp up. But it's still a lot to do.
It is, and he wasn't willing to say he wouldn't stand for re-election if he didn't deliver it. I was just interested in that, because these things are, he made a big, the reason I pushed him on that a little bit, Kate, was because he did make a big deal in the speech, didn't he, that Westminster's full of liars. Westminster is behind this wall and they tell you things you want to hear. They don't live in the real world. And I just wondered whether, maybe it's ridiculous hostage, he's too canny to have a hostage to fortune. But people, if he goes to the country on a promise like that, he is going to have to stick to it, isn't it? You would have thought.
He is, and actually, because it's a 5-year promise, he did say to you, if in 5 years' time we're lucky enough to be elected this time around, if we stand for election again, then it will be the people who judge me. And he's right. If Labour doesn't meet those targets, then people will come down fairly hard on him. Some politicians have in the past gone for this idea that they will put themselves as a hostage to fortune. Rory Stewart, for example. I think with the planning system, this is such a huge fundamental reform. He wasn't willing to do that. Although I think that Labour, it's clear, is committed to at least trying to change. They've put the money in, for example, for more planning officers. Critics, though, will say, well, it's only 300. That's about 1 per council, which is nowhere near enough to get through some of the backlogs in some places. And more to the point, where are these new homes going to go? Are they mostly in the south of the country, which is just, it's not going to level up. It's not going to redefine the way this nation works at the minute. So still some questions for Labour to answer. I thought his answer on glitter was quite, because it does. I can tell you, Stig, as someone who's tried to get glitter out of their hair before, it takes a long time. He said it was a nightmare to shift.
Yes, well, I think I'm sure that's probably right. He also talked about foreign affairs. I'm very strict. When Asma and I talk about Gaza and Israel, we get all sides of the argument, all sides of the geographical dispute. And I think what we see is a moral maze. What's it like to be a Palestinian child in Gaza? But what possibly can people in Israel think when they see massacred babies? So I think we can all understand that the absolute horrors of humanity that are being endured there. And it feels like a very complicated situation, a very nuanced situation, a situation where there is utter sorrow, which you can feel very deeply. Yet the political response embodied by Keir Starmer was actually very, very simplistic, which is Israel has a right to defend itself. And ultimately, he said, it's up to them what they do about it. And I'm very struck by that. That may be the right thing. It may be morally right. People may be applauding him for saying it. But it is a very, very definitive position that Labour are taking.
It is, and there is a reason for that, because Labour has in the past had real difficulty with the issue of Israel and, Jewish people. Under Jeremy Corbyn, these conferences felt very different. They were full of people who would have had a very, very different line to take on what is happening right now. So Labour has a context here and a history that makes this a complicated issue for them. And so Keir Starmer knows that. It's why he was very robust when he said to you that the party that had gone before was basically on the floor, that he's willing to recognise that Labour is coming from a low base and that he's built the party up. It's why this conference was on a knife edge, if you like, when everybody arrived here in Liverpool. I think what's interesting is that there are leaders around the world who can go further on this, and President Obama last night in his statement was clear that Israel needs to stick to the rule of law, and he made a point of saying, I've spoken to Benjamin Netanyahu at length and told him that this is basically only moral, although he didn't use that language, if we stick to the rule of law in war. I think that was an important moment. It's maybe only a message that can come from America at this point. Although you're right that in the days and the weeks ahead, when we start to see the scale of what happens in that region, I think it will be on all leaders to express, where does that line really, really fall?
You can't pretend the line doesn't exist. The line has to exist.
It's very difficult because there is so much emotion here. You only have to look across the front pages. Richard Fletcher this morning explaining some of the detail of what's been happening in that region to you guys. It's an emotive issue. It has a huge historical context to it. And on all sides, those emotions are very high. And it's a problem that has not been solved politically.
Kate McCann, thank you so much for joining us.